This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. Join the union to vote on albums, pick one to discuss with us on the show, get access to bonus episodes, and our private Discord community. Keep the podcast ad-free and make the next episode happen by joining us at digmeoutpodcast.com. All right, Jay, we're back with another listener suggestion. Not a poll, not a roundtable, but one that our union members have pulled out for us. This one specifically comes from Adam Rogan, who's been here many times before with his picks. He chooses not to engage with us because of our smell, but he has in the past. Let's see, what has he picked? Last year it was Leitmotif by Dredge. The year before that, it was Flu 13's In the Foul Key of V. In the year before that, it was Lowcraft by Manticore. And there might have been one or two before that, but
kind of a late 90s focus.
Yeah, lots of guitar rock of
Yeah.
various sounds and shapes and colors. But this time Adam has brought to us, well, guess what? Some guitar rock. And it's a band that it's one of those bands where I've heard the name and I just never checked them out. I don't know if you did, but it is the debut album Point Number One by Chevelle that came out in 1999. Jay, have you listened to Chevelle?
I have. I was trying to figure out which album I got into, and I'm guessing it was Wonder What's Next, which was 2002-ish. Yeah, I got in this band for a little bit. I think it was the early 2000s. Although the Venus Sarah album cover looks really familiar. Maybe it was that. Yeah, I just remember I haven't listened to him in a long time. I think it was one of those bands that like popped for a minute. I, spent a lot of time, probably a couple months listening to them and then sort of didn't keep up with it. Remembered it fondly. I remember my memory of it going in was that it was Tool-like. And remember it, being guitar rock, pretty heavy, down-tuned, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But don't know, early band, and I don't know what they evolved to be, if at all.
Yeah, so interesting. You mentioned about the second record, Wonder What's Next, which came out in 2002. That's the first time they use a very specific font, which they've pretty much used going forward. This is the album that we're talking about. Point Number One does not have that font, and we'll get into maybe why in a little bit, but they have been consistently putting out records.
History of the band.
Debut, as I mentioned, came out in 1999. Wonder What's Next came out in 2002. That was followed by This Type of Thinking Could Do Us In 2004, Venus Sarah in 2007, Sci-Fi Crimes in 2009, Hats Off to the Bull in 2011, La Garjola in 2014, The North Corridor in 2016, and then there was a little bit of a break, and they got back in 2021 with Niratias was the last record from a band that was formed by three brothers. So this is, I didn't know anything about the band. I've heard the name, seen the album covers, but I had no idea anything about them. So it's the Loeffler brothers, originally from Grayslake, Illinois. They formed in 1995. It was Pete Loeffler on lead vocals and guitar. And then you had Sam Loeffler on drums and Joe Loeffler on bass. Now, Joe left the band in 2005, and he was replaced well, he wasn't the original bass player. Matt Scott was in the band for 1 year before they, recorded and signed it, all that stuff. In 2005, Dean Bernardini joined on bass, backing vocals, and he's done some additional drumming, I guess, as well. And he left the band. Bernardini left the band in 2019. So when they reformed for their most recent album, Kemble Walters joined on bass and backing vocals. So that's the current lineup of the band: Pete Loeffler, Sam Loeffler, and Kemble Walters. So when they originally signed, it was to a very small record label called Squint Entertainment. And they were actually shopping a demo around in '98. They played, to a I guess they played some concert where a guy named Steve Taylor, who ran the Squint Entertainment, saw them. That was a contemporary Christian label at the time. This is interesting. So they go into, they're from Illinois. So if you're from Illinois, you're probably going to search up Steve Albini's number and give him a call. And they did. They went to Electrical Audio and they spent 17 days with him, and they recorded their debut, Point Number One. And that came out, as mentioned, in May of 1999. And they got a couple radio singles out of that. The title track, Point Number One, and Mia were the singles, and they were awarded the GMA Dove Awards in 2000 and 2001 for Point Number One. What are the Dove Awards? They're the Gospel Music Association Awards for Christian music. It just made me laugh that they won a gospel award for this record, which doesn't, spoiler alert, does not feature any gospel music.
No.
So Word Records was I guess, connected to Squint, and they were in like a legal battle with Squint. And so that label ended up collapsing. They had done tour, like they had gone out with Seven Dust and Machine Head and Filter and Powerman 5000, and then the label shuts down, and then Epic swoops in and signs them. So Epic in 2002 is where the band sort of like really takes off, I guess you'd say, because that's when they get, the backing of a major label. They get to, make videos for MTV, and they get their own font, which is always important.
They can hire a graphic designer finally.
Yes. Like, we now have a budget for someone to do graphic design. So when the next album came out, Wonder What's Next, it went double platinum, and was nominated for 3 awards in 2003, the Billboard Music Awards. And their song Send the Pain Below was nominated for top rock track, modern rock track, and they were nominated for modern rock artist. They performed at Ozfest that year, and they did a live album and DVD. They went on tour with Disturbed. So like they were, amongst all the big bands at the time on a major label. And their first headlining tour was November to December of 2003, and it started in Cleveland, as all headlining tours must do.
Looking for the stage entrance.
Right. So what's interesting is when they did Ozfest, the Christian community was not happy. And because bands like Cradle of Filth were on, and Cradle of Filth are not known for their family-friendly lyrics. So they were criticized for touring with a band that had satanic and anti-Christian themes in their lyrics. So they recorded their follow-up, This Type of Thinking, in 2004. It was released on late 2004 in September. That went to number 8. I didn't realize how well this band had done, like, chart-wise. Like, to me, I thought of them as sort of like more of a not an underground band, but one of those bands in the early 2000s that were doing like post grunge,
Yep.
but that maybe weren't breaking. Like there was a lot of bands like Engine Down, and we've talked about like the White Octave from time to time, but like these bands were doing like angular sort of loud guitar stuff, but weren't quite breaking through. I think what happened was there was a song they had called The Clincher, which made it to number 3, and then it was included in the Madden NFL 2005 game. Which, if you're in the Madden game in the early 2000s,
Yep.
You're in my brain.
Because I didn't associate, to your point, I didn't associate this band with being on the radio very much, but
Right.
I also wasn't listening to the radio at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me to say, but the Madden thing makes more sense.
And this is when they go out on tour with bands like Taproot. There's a name I have not spoken of probably ever on this podcast. 30 Second to Mars, Nickelback. You know, they're opening for big bands at this point, probably playing like hockey arenas, like 20,000, 15,000. So this is Jay, this is Texas is on notice here. In May of 2007, during a show in Fort Worth, Chevelle's trailer containing all of the band's equipment was stolen from their hotel where they were staying.
Ruh-roh.
They were like, if you see any items labeled Chevelle on eBay, that's ours. They ended up getting some of the stuff back. They had 14 guitars stolen. They got 2 of them back.
That's brutal.
And yeah, that's so then they having to replace all that stuff. They made well, I'm not going to go through every record, but they continue making albums for Epic all the way to Neurotis, so we did the most recent one, and they've done a couple compilation albums, and one came out in 2012, and then they had another one out in 2018. So big. I did not realize the big catalog that this band had with so many albums, compilations. I didn't know that they were still around even. So
yeah,
that was all new to me. And still touring and all that stuff. So they're still an active band. Let's get to some comments over at our Patreon page for the people who left some come back here. Where's that webpage? There we go. Gavin said, I've gone where the album, as it sounds like, and definitely would have been into it the day. I hear a cop shoot cop drums behind the Maynard singing with filter helmet riffing. Andrew OC said, I got a chance to meet Chevelle backstage around 2010 or so. My buddy asked them what it was like working with the legendary Steve Albini for this record. They replied he mostly just read the newspaper and he made the album sound big. So if you're wondering what the difference is between Rick Rubin and Steve Albini is in the studio reading the newspaper. Rick Rubin is at home reading the newspaper. So there you go. Rest in peace, Steve Albini. Keith Miller said, early Chevelle sounds so much like Tool that it's distracting, at least to me. That being said, there isn't a song on this album that I don't like, and Anticipation is borderline amazing with its galloping rhythms and stoner metal guitars bass. Kyle Bittner said, definitely a worthy album. Like the majority of their albums, this is chock full of hard driving rock songs. I do agree the vocals are distracting at times due to the Maynard comparison, but they work well. Willie Dillon said, this album is unique in Chevelle's discography. Is the only one with raw production thanks to Albini, which I think suits them well, although I wouldn't call it Albini's finest work, but maybe part of that was just a guy who mastered it. Sure, it does sound like a more accessible Tool, but I like it. More Accessible Tool is somebody needs a band called More Accessible Tool where they do like much simpler versions of Tool songs. They remove all the time changes and everything's just 4/4.
Yeah, that would be a decent album title too.
let's just give Tool songs to children and call it More Accessible Tool.
Oh, that might exist. There is the Stone Age children's lullabies.
Oh, there is?
You've never heard that?
No, I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I'll have to go search that one up.
It's pretty old.
As the kids say.
Somebody did an album of turning Queens of the Stone Age, I think, into children's songs.
All right, well, Jay, tell me what works for you on Point Number 1 by Chevelle.
You know, I like the voice. Obviously, going into this, you know, I'm biased in my memory it being, you know, pretty Tool adjacent, more accessible Tool, if you will. I was surprised though at the range, and it actually reminded me vocally a bit more of something like Placebo, the way he sings.
Mm-hmm.
It's a higher voice, a little nasally, but decent, you know, good range. And it sits really well over these heavier kind of down-tuned, palm muted guitar riffs. It's a nice contrast. So, you know, you can get a vocal that's a little bit more breathy and even softer, more intimate sounding against sometimes, you know, really harsh sounding guitars, or at least dark sounding guitars. So just that's always worked for me, I think, with this band and what brought me in. The other part of it is, particularly on this album, I don't remember thinking this, I think when I got into the band, you know, years ago, is the range of guitar tones is I think refreshing, and again a bit of a surprise for me. I was expecting pretty much, you know, 100% super compressed palm muted riffs for all 42 minutes of this record, and that's not what you necessarily get. You know, there's a lot of really cool clean tones, and why that's important is that it opens up some variety, you know, in terms of how the guitars are used, you know, what they sound like, the styles they're playing. And then it lets the distortion come in layers. There's actually some nuance here to how heavy the guitars get, so that you can, you know, let them carry the, you know, climaxes, or, you know, the grooves that provide the momentum of the song, but contrast that and pull back, you know, with sections that are cleaner. And I think that works really well. Just keeping things dynamic, you know, they don't flatten out to like you're always 100% on with these, you know, super compressed riffs that just don't have any dynamic range to them or surprises. They avoid that, I think, by embracing some nuance, which is sonically what's going on with the guitars, which I think is important for a band like this. There's not, you know, there's no other instrumentation, right? There's no keyboards on this. There's no other, nothing. You know, I don't think there's backup vocals, right? So you're just talking about one vocal and what the guitars can do. So I think the nuance there is pretty important. At times the way that that comes across, which I was again surprised by, was it sounded a little more like hum at times. On a couple tracks that I didn't remember. That was a band I didn't remember associating with Chevelle before. So that was a bit of a surprise and kind of exciting to hear. You know, a good example is Mia.
I'm made of peanuts and out of shells. God spares the quality of himself. Unique design, but we can't help ourselves. So why I made a face that bugs you? I won't sign conversation around you. I made a face that bugs you.
That style, clean guitar riff in there, and the way that it sort of develops is very hum-like to me. There's some harmonics that are in the vein of what you would hear hum do. You know, and that comes across in terms of songwriting. So you got the sonic palette they're working with that I think is works for me personally, what the things I'm into, but also, you know, dynamically. There's two types of songs I hear on this album that I think are working really well, that are actually at odds with each other, but collectively on the record, I think is a good thing. So you've got tracks like Mia and SMA, which are shorter, you know, they're under 3 minutes, 2.5 minutes. So kind of pretty compact, focused, well written. To me, those have a hum feel to them, you know, so they have that dynamic rhythmically, musically. You know, some great drum parts. They get big. But then there's some tracks on here like Blank Earth and Pier, which breathe a lot. There's a lot of space in them. They take time to develop. There's a variety of tones, like I was talking about. So you sort of get the full palette of the band on those tracks. They're longer. You know, they're pushing 4 to 5 minutes. There's more vocal range on them. And they're just less predictable. You know, the writing of those songs, the way they're structured, don't follow the like template of introduce riff, cut out guitars for the verse, you know, bring riff back with more distortion for chorus. You know, it kind of gets out of that formula on this record or for those songs, and just lets the band, I think, explore a little bit more. They feel a little looser, or relaxed, and I think you just see more interesting things emerge. You know, it's less predictable. So I like the duality of that, of like, hey, we can be super tight 2-minute band, like, and just, you know, crush, and then we can also open up and write a 5-minute song that, you know, doesn't start in the most predictable way and takes some turns you wouldn't expect and shows a lot of range, vocally and dynamically. So those are sonically and sort of songwriting wise what was working for me. What worked for you?
Well, before I get into that, Adam gave us a few points that I want to share. He said, I bought this album after seeing the video for the song Mia on MTV. It's very Tool-esque with stop motion animation. I'm pretty sure it got a small amount of radio play as well. To me, this album sounds like grunge mixed with Helmet and Tool. I've also seen comparisons to Hum. What he really liked. I really like the jangly, rhythmic, undistorted guitar they use in a lot of the songs. I have no idea what that's called, but it sounds very distinct. I think it's just a clean guitar. I mean, it's probably down-tuned, so that's why it sounds a little bit different. And I totally get the Hum comparison, because Hum definitely used a lot of so what they would do is, so when you play a drop D, you can just play with one finger. I don't know if people know about why you would tune down, but the whole point is you can play with one finger, the bottom 3 strings.
And that style of guitar, like drop D guitar, what is also called tuning down,
yes,
just becomes super popular right at this period, right? From like
exactly
late 90s through now.
Yep.
It pretty much defines hard rock and metal guitar. Like everybody tunes down now.
That it was pretty famously made popular by Tommy Iommi of Black Sabbath.
Yeah,
he was the first guy that like really dug into the possibilities of the drop D down tuning. And then some people would make it even heavier by tuning the entire guitar down an additional either half step or step. So you're taking that D and going to either a C sharp or a C. When you get down to C, your C string, which used to be your E string, is now flopping essentially, because it's so loosened up. I don't think they're in C. I think this is probably just drop D, maybe drop D with a half step. He said also the production is great. I always loved Albini's style. He said it sounds like In Utero and Razorblade Suitcase, 2 albums that I love. I thought that was an interesting comparison, comparing them to earlier major label albums that Albini worked on. Vocals are emotional and sound great throughout. My favorite songs are point number 1, Mia, Skeptic, and SMA. So based on what Adam said, I will agree. And what you said, this has a very nice cross section of bands that I like: Helmet, Hum, Tool, especially the 90s 2000s Tool. When they start getting into the more progressive stuff, that's when I sort of lose focus on them. And I thought comparing this also to Razor Blade Suitcase and In Utero was interesting choice, because obviously In Utero has a very specific sound. It's, if you like that sound, it sounds awesome. And Razor Blade Suitcase being the more polished, I guess you'd say, end of that, with regards to Albini's production.
Some of the vocal stuff gets in this that grunge, kind of commercial grunge space too. Some of the delivery gets further away from a Tool or Placebo kind of like enunciation and that type of melodic sensibility, and more towards what you would hear from Bush or even Pearl Jam. It gets a little like more, I don't know how to describe that delivery, but it's a little faster paced and not as drawn out.
Yeah, it's it's strange because I think the simple tone of his voice is most reminiscent of Maynard from Tool, and then you also get a little bit of Brian Molko from Placebo. But I also heard in the way that he would stretch lyrics and lines and do vocalization, just like one where he's just on one note for like 10 seconds, like it's a long drawn out note. And it was reminding me of stuff that was more emo at the time. Not necessarily, sometimes the emo stuff is more on the punk end of things. But then when you think about the emo end of like Sunny Day Real Estate and what Jeremy Enoch would do, where the vocal was a little bit less, what do you want? It's not as driven by the lyrics as much as the emotional content of how he's singing it. Like that's, and you said it, like there are some songs where they sort of like allow space to happen, and that's where you get those moments of just more of more vocal gymnastics. I think it's Long that has a big climatic scream in it towards the end of the song. There's a lot here that reminded me of all the bands we talked about, and because of his production there, it's really easy to hear everything. I mean, you have a 3-piece band which sounds like 3 pieces, like this, like you said, not overdubbed vocals, not over, there's maybe an overdubbed guitar here and there just to add some weight to things, but it sounds pretty like true to a 3-piece band, which is, and also that the fact that I liked that they're willing to sort of go into this almost krautrock, like the opening song sticks on this one riff at the beginning for an unusually long moment of time. You're like, okay, it would probably be after 4 beats, and you're like, nope, okay, we're gonna go it again. Oh nope, we're gonna go it again, like setting you up that, okay, this is gonna be a hard rock record, but also there's gonna be a little more experimenting and a little bit more happening here than maybe you would expect from a commercial end of things, of bands at this point in 1999, which could be doing, they could have been having record scratches on top of this. They could, there could have been all sorts of things to push this more towards, like, I guess more commercial, more in tune with the rap rock that was happening.
Sure.
But they definitely keep it more disciplined, I would say is the word. They're very disciplined in how this is arranged, how this is produced, how this is presented. So I appreciated that. So is there anything that doesn't work for you on the album?
Well, another way to say a more accessible tool is to say a more generic tool.
Sure.
So there are stretches of this record that to me just sound, especially in 2025, just so generic, like generic hard rock, pop, commercial metal. I'm pretty burnt out on the palm muted drop D tuning riffs. Not from, just this band, but it is so stereotypical at this point of what rock bands are supposed to sound like and have sounded like for like way too long that, the stretches there where it's a lot of that are just not compelling to me. They offset that, with some secondary guitar parts that I think are really important, that are a little bit more drony and stranger, that kind of push off the palm muting, 3-chord or sometimes 1-chord riffs that help, but not enough. They're not doing that enough, and I think that's what makes a band like Hum, much more interesting than this, even though they are very similar sounding, at particular moments. Or a band like Tool is more interesting than this band, even though they sound like each other at times. Is those bands are willing to, take more risks and push things a little further, be a little weirder, use those powerful riffs, time to time, but not rely on them so heavily. And I think this record just relies on them so heavily. The other part of that is just I guess if you're gonna conform to this formula musically, I need more hooks. And there was very little, even though I like the singer a lot, there's very little that's memorable for me on this record. As I would listen to it and kind of go about my day, I didn't find myself able to recall or remember a lot of this. And I think that comes down to the choruses are just not very compelling. There's not a hook. They often, or too often, follow the guitar riff. There's a couple distinctions on tracks that I really like Mia, like we've called out a couple times, where the vocal is offset from the guitar, which I think is really effective and important for this band to do. So, it's more of a riff vocal, as opposed to the two are locked up and basically doing the same melodic and rhythmic patterns. I think that's critically important for this band, for me personally, to stick with them, is to find ways for the vocal to bring something different and then push melodically a bit more. I think that's why I'm not grabbing on a lot to any of the hooks here or any of the choruses. It's just melodically a little, I don't know if it's safe or buried. It just doesn't cut through and grab me in the choruses, even though the vocal, I think sonically, especially in the verses, is, really effective in terms of separating itself and sitting above. There's something about when they get to the choruses, the guitars maybe get so big that, and there's just a lack of creativity on the vocal side to really pull apart, separate a bit, and really deliver something that an earworm, something that just sticks with you and you're walking around, humming it or remembering it, or there's a line that you're like, oh, that was a super cool line. I can't wait for that to come back. Or even re-listening to the record, I was probably remembering more of the guitar riffs than I was remembering the vocals, any vocal line or melody. So I think that's what doesn't work for me, holistically. How about you?
Yeah, there is you mentioned about it being a more generic tool, and I was like, a perfect circle.
Yeah.
But even then, like there is there's a something that happens where on I feel like his vocal locks into the rhythm pretty consistently to where you don't get the counter that would be more interesting.
Yeah.
And Maynard tends to find the interesting alternate melodies in the songs that are, you know, not obvious. And I
Yeah.
think that that's what works for him, because he will be very rhythmic and follow the band, but then take it at a certain point, he'll surprise you and be like, whoa, that's an interesting turn. This is the band's first album. I understand they're on a small label. From what I read, they did two big sessions for this, and the first one did not go well with Albini. Like Albini wasn't happy with the way it sounded, and they weren't happy, and the label was like, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, can we work with someone else? And they're like, no. Finish the record with him. And then when they did that, I guess everything was chill. But point being, like, you know what you're getting with regards to Steve and how he produced. So in some respects, like, this is the most obvious outcome. You know, if you're looking at the Bush album or the Nirvana album that he did, the difference is in the songwriters. You know, Gavin Rossdale could craft a pretty poppy hook.
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain, despite not wanting to, was a really catchy songwriter.
Yep.
So what's just kind of missing here is what you said. There's just not that like one big hook. There's some really cool riffs. There's some really cool it was mentioned there's like one of the songs has almost a gallop to it. Is it like, it might be Anticipation, where you get like a genuine like interesting rhythm happening that doesn't feel like it's sort of a watered down version of another song.
Yeah, it has like a 70s doom metal groove or something. Like it's almost like a Sabbath or even later stoner rock kind of groove to it. You can hear like Geezer Butler playing that bass line.
Cuts on his hands, speak a little louder. He takes that side and lets you know. And what's in his speech? It has come up face. Yeah, what's in his? You cover your face, 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 face.
I feel like the thing that was missed was there actually could have been like more stop start dynamics happening. They kind of just flow through the songs a lot, even the like shorter to longer, it doesn't matter. And there wasn't a lot of breaking up parts of finding interesting places to stop and start. And that was just I think that's just something that comes with time and with songwriting, that you figure that out or you don't, and the band fails. But I feel like because of this band's success, they probably figured out songwriting, because overall this sounds a lot like the debut album of a band in the late 90s. It's the best way I could put, like, this feels like a band that incorporated a lot of influences from the 90s, put out their record. You go, okay, that sounds like this, that sounds like this, that sounds like this. What do you sound like? What's your band actually sound like? And it seems like going forward, based on sales, based on popularity, that's where they figured out who they were. I'd be curious to know if I've ever heard a Chevelle song from one of those later albums, like just on the radio, because there was a time when I didn't have satellite radio or I didn't have streaming in my car, where I would just turn on like 99.7 The Blitz or CD 101 or some rock station here in Columbus.
Sure.
And it's entirely possible that I heard them and have no idea
Yeah.
because they were sandwiched between two other songs and I never heard the DJ say the name.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's entirely possible. I forgot to mention when they did electronic press kit for this album, as many bands did,
Sure.
and there was a young Chicago comedian that they got to do the electronic press kit. This is like I don't know if it was like a host or whatever, and that was Fred Armisen, who would later go on to Saturday Night Live and movies and TV and shows and stuff like that. But he was just like a comic in Chicago that they hired to do that. It's just the weird, and knowing that Fred Armisen was in a band in Chicago in the 90s,
Yep.
like that makes me curious as to if we're ever going to get to that band of his. We need to I need to do some research on what his band was. I remember them having like what was the name of the band that he was in? I can't remember. Anyway, Trenchmouth. That's what it was.
Oh, okay.
So we're the album, better EP, decent single. Where are we landing on this?
I'm landing at a better EP. I've got Open in point number one. I like how it starts. You actually hear the range of the guitar tones on that if you really listen. It's interesting. As they introduce that riff, it kind of runs the gamut of all this sonically, all the guitars you're going to hear through those two songs. Mia, I think, is a really solid track. I like Long.
Cause we blame them for having rights. Anyone lose a God? And I found a God. Raise the question, it's giving him wonders answers. Bleeding clean and now on you. Hitting him won't keep long. Does he blame him for having rights?
Anticipation is interesting. I think where they're going with that is a better rhythm or an interesting rhythmic direction. Again, it doesn't deliver though as a chorus really. So I prefer Long. Blank Earth, I think, is another side of the band, like I mentioned, an SMA where they open up, which I enjoyed, in Peer as well. Those clean guitars actually get a little jazzy. The way the drums, it actually has soft drums, which I think is the only track in the album where, the drummer's not destroying the kit, which is a little refreshing. So I'm at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tracks, which includes an intro, track that I think are working pretty well and would make a pretty solid EP. How about you?
I'm with you as well. I agree with a lot of those songs. I think the thing is that it's not that there's anything truly bad. It's just there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's some songs that just don't elevate to the next level, and when then they just sort of fade into the background as album tracks. So this is something that I would put on. When I was on the plane, it was traveling music because I was traveling this week. But when we were driving or whatever, or when I was driving, it definitely kind of faded into the background a little bit.
Yeah.
In you kind of like, oh, what song is this? The songs that popped, and whether it was because of a riff or a line or a rhythm. So I'm gonna go with a better EP. I think that's actually complete opposite, not the opposite, but was a 100% worthy album, Jay, from our patrons.
Really?
100%. And that's not just one vote, by the way.
Damn.
So we're not on the same.
Way to go, Adam.
We're not on the same page as our patrons. We've gone a different way.
Oops.
Yeah. So, folks, if you'd like to chime in, are we wrong that this is a better EP? Is our patron community right, or is our patron community a little too kind? Well, not too kind, but maybe they got some rose tinted glasses.
I mean, it sounds like this band, based on their track record of releases and touring, have a pretty strong fan base, I would think. So we shouldn't be too surprised.
They took over our patron community. Well, that's two better EPs from us. We're the album from the community. We need to thank Adam for once again bringing us an interesting rock record that we were not familiar with. Pairs along nicely with the Dredge and the Flu 13 and the other albums. So Adam, thank you. And once again, if you would like to be someone who picks our records, you can go to digmeoutpodcast.com and join the union. If this episode brought back good memories and positive vibes, join us at that website, digmeoutpodcast.com, to explore our archive of free episodes, over 800, history of the band posts, and our weekly new release roundups. If you want more, you paid subscribers unlock bonus episodes covering 70s, 80s, and aughts, new release reviews, and access to our private Discord community. That's digmeoutpodcast.com. And while you're there, suggest an album you think deserves to be featured on a future episode of Dig Me Out. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.